Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about Fallout foot sliding, which I think is a good case study of R&D, especially in game development in the 1980s and 1990s. I've talked about the Fallout foot sliding problem a lot in a number of different videos. Most recently, I did it in a video about the difference between first and third person. And Koala Brownie asked if I would be said I would be interested to know why the foot slip took so much programming time if there's any story to tell. As a TV animator, that would seem like more of an art issue. You're right, but I want to talk about it. I have to give a lot of context before I dive into the exact problem, which was thorny. And I decided to make a video because people have asked about this foot sliding problem a lot because I bring it up a lot. And I wanted a video that I could point to and go, here, I talk about it all here. It's also such a good example of illustrating what it was like to be a game developer, especially like in the 90s and of course in the 80s as well. But it was a quintessential game development thorny issue in Fallout. And I will end by talking about whether we even should have fixed it. So before I can start, let me describe development in the 90s and of course in the 80s before that. It was a time of what I call figure it out. There were no engines you could buy off the shelf. There weren't a lot of books, and especially there weren't books specifically about the issues you were facing. There was nothing online, written or video. No tutorials walking you through, here's exactly how you do this. You basically had to figure it out. Didn't matter whether you were a programmer, an artist, a designer, or doing sound, or anything. You had to figure it out. There were some books, I will put a caveat out there, where there were some books that were first principles, like a lot of math. Like I still remember there were these gem series that I liked called graphics gems. They would explain how to do a lot of things, but they were very much in first principle. If you were a programmer and you didn't know, vector and matrix operations, good luck reading some of those graphics gems. You basically had to know that, and then it would explain how to solve a very general problem that then you had to figure out how to solve in your game using the hardware that was available. Nothing more specific than that. Now, I would say, and I think I can say this definitively, most, if not all, game developers in the 80s and 90s were figure-it-out folks. You wouldn't be in the industry if you had to have everything explained to you. The hardware, the problems that were being faced, it was being faced for the first time by a lot of people. So almost everybody on the team would be figure-it-out folks. Okay, so that's general context for what the industry was like. Now let me explain the context for Fallout itself before I can even jump into the foot sliding. In Fallout, we were using 3D software called Alias, and at the time it ran on SGIs that were running an operating system called IRIX, and I've mentioned that because I knew IRIX is a flavor of Unix, and because I knew Unix, the 3D artists would often call me in if they were having problems with those machines, and I would try to help them because the IT department at Interplay was used to dealing with PCs and Macs. So that was unique right there. The use of 3D software was brand new in the early 90s. We were using it on Fallout to make sprites, and no one had done that before. In all the previous Interplay games, sprites were made with 2D software, with a 2D artist drawing the models and hand animating them in every direction that you wanted to show the sprite move in. We weren't doing that. We were using Alias to make one 3D model of a character, and then there would be one walk cycle. They would walk, boom, boom, boom. Then you could rotate the camera. We were doing 6 rotations, hex-based in Fallout. So then you'd rotate the camera to 6 different orientations, and you'd get, from one model and one walk cycle, you could get all 6 animations. Now, keep in mind what we would do is we would record the walk cycles. It would be on a video, which was now flattened 2D, and then we would use that to generate the sprites as a 2D sprite that was animated and the offset in the direction it would have to go. So the sprites were stored. If you would run it, it would just look like a character doing this in place because the offset, how far to move them in each frame, was stored in each frame. So they didn't actually move. It was just a character doing this with offsets. We thought it looked cool. It really let us leverage the small team because one model, one animation could get you all the rotations. It was easier for them to change by putting different items in the person's hand or armor on them. They could add it and remove it easier than redrawing everything. And then you just reran it and you got the walk cycle of the guy in leather armor and the guy in power armor and the guy with a gun, this one-handed gun, and the guy with two-handed gun. So you could do all those things faster. But we had to figure that all out. There was no one to explain to us what to do. We just had to figure it out. But we were all, like I said, we were all figure it out people. So we figured it out. Until in early 95, according to my notes, we ran into the foot sliding issue. And what this was specifically was when the character would walk, when he got to one cycle, he would hiccup. And there was a noticeable hiccup as they walked in the game when they got to the end of the cycle. Just so you know, one cycle would be, they'd be standing, if they started walking, let's say they put their left foot out first. The full cycle was left foot out, swing the right foot all the way in, and then when the left foot swung back in, so it was even with the right foot, that was one cycle. We were having a massive hiccup problem with that. So every time they would walk, they would hiccup. Also, their feet were sliding on the ground as we were attempting to get the correct offset. We couldn't seem to get the right offset. They were always moving and then they'd hiccup and sometimes slide over a little bit. So there was always this foot motion in addition to that hiccup. We thought it was one problem, and we thought the problem was imperfect looping. What that means is when the character's moving, and it's not just their feet, their legs and feet moving, their upper body's moving too, their head's moving a little bit, their arms are moving a lot. All of those have to get back into the same state at the end of one loop, or there will be a little bit of a jerk. If their arms aren't exactly synced, you may see a motion of one arm that's really far when you get to the loop. So we thought the problem was with the imperfect looping. We spent a lot of time trying to get that looping correct. Even when we were positive we were looping correctly, like you could look at it in 3D and see that you've got their hands, their head, everything is pixel perfect with where they were at the start. Remember, in 3D, though, they'd be moving off in the distance. So when they got here, they looked exactly the same as they did here. We still got a hiccup in the game. Which, of course, everyone was like, the programmers are doing this wrong. There's something wrong with your math. There's something wrong with the tool that's taking the video that we make in 3D and converting it to 2D. Programmer problem, programmer problem, programmer problem. We spent a long time looking for this. And I'm going to come back to that later. We spent months. I think we spent weeks looking at it, but it was at least me and another programmer and at least 2 artists. So it turned out to be months. I'm saying months because it was 4 guys. But because there was a second problem. And I didn't mean to say that in that Lord of the Rings. There was another ring made. But there was a second problem. And that problem was lack of orthographic projection. Okay, I'll see you guys later. If you're wondering what I mean, I have a video on the different kinds of projection and tiling and walking and I'll link it below. In general, though, the problem was this. Alias in the early 90s only supported parallel projection, meaning things got smaller as they moved away from the camera. Parallel lines intersected. We needed orthographic projection, which is what the game was running in. A tile down here on the screen had the same angles and edges as a tile up here. It was orthographic. Parallel lines did not meet as they went out in the distance. We had to have that. That is how the game ran. Turns out you can't take a parallel projection sprite and throw it into you can't take a perspective generated sprite and throw it in to a parallel projection game. You need it to be done orthographic, but they did not support it. At that point, we were scratching our head. Once we figured out that's what the problem was, that became a problem with the software. It wasn't something that I could fix. It didn't look like it was on Autodesk's horizon to put that in, and we needed this fixed right now. And if I remember correctly, and I'm sure I hear from someone if I'm not, Jason Anderson solved this in a very, very clever way. He determined that if you pulled the camera out to a near infinite distance, effectively, the edges of if you looked at a tile they were in, the edges looked parallel because it was so far away, any perspective was lost. And then you could take the camera's magnification and zoom it nearly infinitely back. Bear in mind, with a physical camera, this would not work. Everything would be blurry. But this wasn't a physical camera. It's a virtual camera. So he moved the distance of the camera to nearly infinite distance away, and then the magnification to nearly infinite zoom. Solved. Our hiccups were gone. We had perfect walk animations. But this took a lot of time, art time, programmer time. Like I said, individually we all lost weeks. Collectively we lost months to fix this bug in 95. In 1996, Diablo came out and had foot sliding like you were watching Ice Capades. No one cared. I defy you to find me one review in 1996 where anyone mentions it, cares about it, talks about it, even on online groups, which even back then could be full of people who would nitpick a game to death. I didn't hear a word about it. And since we were still a year out, I was like, great. We just spent all that time fixing a feature that no one cares about. Now, when I bring it up today and I talk about was it worth it, there are people in the comment section who go, oh no, that's really important to me. I noticed it. It was super important to me. I guess my question is, really, it would have made you not buy the game? I don't think that's true. And I'm glad you like it. But what I always bring up is, look at all the other problems that Fallout shipped with that might have been fixed if those artists and those programmers had devoted themselves to that. I'm not saying this wasn't a bug. I'm saying the priority was probably set too high to fix it, and too many resources were spent fixing it, and then other things got put in. Can I prove that? No. But it certainly is my feeling, having worked on that game for 3.5 years, that we spent way too much time on the foot sliding problem. Now let me talk about why this matters today. These days, a lot of developers work on engines and tools that are provided to them. And that is perfectly fine. And it's why you see much more games go out, especially in solo development, because they can get an engine off the shelf that does a lot of what they need to do. And they don't need to be an expert in animation or lighting or user interface, because a lot of that is provided as settings in the engine. But if you're working on a game, a big game today, and you're working in the stages I talk about in the stages video, which I'll link below, when you get to the prototype stage, you need more figure it out folks than, hey, I like having everything provided to me so I know what I'm supposed to do, folks. You need more figure it out folks in the prototype stage, because that's when you're working out what different features you want and how they're going to work and how they're going to work together. And that's the whole point of the prototype, is to see those features in action. And if you have people that are just waiting for you to tell them what to do, they're not very useful in that stage. You want more of the figure it out folks. And I'm not saying those people don't exist anymore. But I am saying back in the 80s and 90s, almost every developer was a figure it out person. These days, you have people who are just like, just tell me what to do, I want to do it. Or I work on this section of the game, I have no idea what's going on over here. So those people are hard to have in your game at the prototype stage. They're very much the people you want later when you're trying to, like, I want everything to be beautiful, I'm making a beautiful corner, I'm doing the vertical slice. That's when you desperately need those people. And by the way, I have a whole video on how you pick a project based on your team, and I'll link it below. So if you don't have a lot of figure it out folks, you probably are going to have trouble at your prototype stage, and you may not even have one. And also, let me just say here, it's great that because of things like Unity and Unreal, you can hire people and they can immediately get started in your game because they already know Unity or Unreal or any of the other engines that are out there. But if you make your own engine, it's hard to hire people who won't need time to catch up and figure things out. And those people probably need to be figure it out folks, because you have your own in-house internal engine. It may be documented, but there are things they're going to have to figure out. So these days, that's why I think game engines are used more frequently. It's just the spread of knowledge. It's easy to find things online to explain to you exactly what to do. But if you do that too much and you can't be a figure it out person, I don't think you're as useful with the prototype stage. Anyway, that is why I think the foot sliding problem is interesting to me. It's a case study of how development went in the 80s and 90s, and it's a perfect example of here was a problem that we fixed, but should we have fixed it? What did we miss out by fixing it? Who knows? It's an interesting thing to talk about. It's an interesting case study because there's a lot of different viewpoints you can have on it. I thought I'd throw all that in right here. And now whenever I talk about the fallout foot sliding problem, I'll just point to this video. So I hope you like that.